Housekeeping first. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs. Please do not use the lifts. Assemble in Hawley Square on the Green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure that their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls whilst the meeting is in progress. Please switch off or turn to silent your mobiles and do not make the calls while this meeting is going on. Please note this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and will be subsequently broadcast on the internet. I have to ask if anyone intends to film the meeting, but there are no members of the public here, Charles, so we will move straight on. Officers in attendance: Colin Carmichael, the Chief Executive; Samira Khan, Interim Head of Legal and Monitoring Officer, and Charles will be taking our minutes. I have received apologies from Councillor Alban, who is being substituted by Councillor Scobie. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest to declare in the items of business on the agenda for this meeting? No, Charles? Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. To approve the minutes of the meeting of the General Purpose Committee held on the 4th of November 2022, and a copy of which is attached to the agenda pack. Please can I have a proposer and seconder? Proposed David Saunders. Seconded Councillor Bob Bayford. Do members agree? Item 4, senior management restructure. To introduce this item is Colin Carmichael, Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Certainly not Councillor.
No, sorry. Slip of the tongue.
Thank you very much. I'm going to assume you've read the report. I'll just pick out highlights for you. It goes on a bit, I agree, but I thought I'd do that rather than keep it short, if you see what I mean, because I think this is pretty important subject. It's probably better for you to see all of the reasoning behind all the thinking than not. At the moment, the delegation that exists in Thanet, which I have to say I find surprising, is that the Chief Executive is able to take decisions on the senior management structure in terms of directors and heads of service, not the position that I've come across in previous councils. And it seems that, I mean, even if you are only considered to be the governing body of the council, you ought to be in a position of agreeing the structure for the senior level underneath the post of Chief Executive. So I'm working on the basis that although technically you don't have to agree the structure, I'm asking you to at least endorse it, and I will take it as your formal approval. It's also the case that the Chief Executive, I gather, appoints 2 directors and heads of service. And I'm suggesting in this that councillors should appoint to the posts of Chief Executive and directors, and the Chief Executive should appoint to heads of service. So that, in many ways, summarises the report. The reasoning behind what I'm putting forward to you is set out mainly in paragraph 2. At the moment, there are temporary arrangements in place with senior staff covering slightly weird combinations of activities. My favourite is that Matt Sandemer's finance manager is not only the acting head of finance, but also the acting head of operations. Never come across anything like that before. I entirely understand why it's been done. I'm not in any way criticising it, but the sooner we get out of it and back to some form of normality, the better. The other main reason from my point of view is that about 8 or 9 posts are unfilled because everybody is waiting for the structure to be formally approved, and there's clearly no point appointing to any vacant posts until everybody knows. People, particularly who might apply from outside, know what the structure is that they're joining and that it has some logic behind it. And as a result of that, although I think people are working really hard, the people who are doing the cover are working incredibly hard and doing their very best. There is a limit to what people can do, and there are many projects that the council wants to deliver, which, to be honest, we're scrabbling at. The really important issues, such as the levelling up funds, all of those sorts of issues are being progressed. but at the expense of issues such as what do we do with this building, where there's just not enough capacity at the moment to deal with that, not enough thinking space. I know probably people like me have said this to you for years, but genuinely, it is a bit of a problem. So the sooner that's fixed, the better. So that's one main reason. The second, which you'll all know about, are the Section 24 reports and the Independent Monitoring Officer report, which clearly argued in favour of a review of the structure. A little bit to do with the HR function, but I think within the context of reviewing the structure, and I think it's not been reviewed for some time, so now is definitely the time to do it. From paragraph 2.5, I talk a bit about the recruitment process and the suggestion that as soon as we can, effectively, we set up what I'm calling an appointment subcommittee of this committee, which would be politically balanced and would be able to take decisions on the appointment of the chief executive and the directors of the council through a formal interview and recruitment process in the future, that is. In paragraph 4, I go through the principles behind what I've been putting forward. This absolutely isn't rocket science, and I've actually quite deliberately gone for what I suppose you might call a fairly traditional local government structure, primarily because I don't think anybody will want the thing to be torn up and put back together again in a year or so's time. Whatever the position about the future of the chief executive position, what you want that individual to be able to do, I would suggest, would be to be appointed and be comfortable with the structure they've inherited, so that the rest of the staff have a good 2 to 3 years ahead of them, where they can assume that they are in post doing the things that they're appointed to do with enough time to get on with these major projects, all of which take some time. So that's been an important thing from my point of view. So I talked about support services, that's effectively within a corporate services department. The service delivery, of which there is a lot, because Thanet has an in-house waste and recycling service employing around 250 people. That's a very big thing, which most councils don't have. So I think you need 2 departments to manage the direct service delivery. And I do think it's really important the chief executive has direct control over what I'd call the direction of the council, which is partly to do with, I hate the word brand, but it is the brand of the council, how we appear to the outside world, the communications that we use to describe ourselves, the digital agenda, which we're trickling in at the early stages of here in Thanet, but we do need to get our collective heads around that, because the ability to access services online is now so universally expected outside the council in the private sector. The sooner we can get on with doing a lot of that within the council, the better. And obviously the policy team, climate change and so on, being positioned in the centre reporting to the chief executive is pretty important, I would say. Job titles, I'm worried about this because I don't really want to confuse issues. Everybody's probably got used to the corporate director and service director titles, but that is quite unusual. And I did consult, and I've consulted twice, as you will see in the report, and the vast majority of people wanted to return to director and head of service. 1 or 2 people, to be honest, who are currently called service directors, who made the perfectly valid point that it might appear to the outside world to be a demotion, and I get that. And I did think about assistant directors and directors, but actually the vast majority of people were fairly clear that going back to director and head of service made a lot of sense, and so that's the proposal I'm making. I've dealt with the HR function, which was a specific thing of the independent monitoring officer, and effectively created a post of head of HR, managing the HR function, reporting to the director of corporate services, which I think positions the HR function in a much more positive way. In paragraph 5, I've talked about the consultation process, very happy to answer any questions on that. I was quite pleased with the number of replies I got. They absolutely weren't all from the people at the senior level. Quite a few people at a relatively junior level gave me some really interesting ideas, many of which I've actually incorporated in where the functions actually report to. People who've done a job for years who basically said, I've always wanted to say this, but how about if I reported to that person instead of that person? And sometimes the overall picture didn't allow that, but quite a lot of the time it did. So in paragraph 6, I just summarise the main proposals, proposing to create 4 departments, and I have set out there the very specific posts and the functions underneath all of the posts. I will undoubtedly have missed a function somewhere or put it slightly incorrectly or named it incorrectly. So in the recommendations, there's a proposal to delegate to me in consultation with the leader any slight changes I need to make. And occasionally, things will come up as you're implementing these things where you think, oh, that function actually would be better somewhere else. But the general overall shape is very much as I've set out here. Paragraph 8, I've talked about the implementation process. The position at the moment is that as soon as you've approved this today, formally, the senior managers who are currently in post have their posts deleted. They become at risk of redundancy. I've actually technically already put them at risk of redundancy, very sadly, the day before Christmas, I think I did. I don't know why this always happens just before Christmas. Why do restructures always do that? I think they've all taken it in their stride, but the sooner we can give them some certainty, the better. So if you approve the recommendations today, I have set up internal interviews for me to conduct next week with all of the staff whose posts are being deleted, so that hopefully by the end of next week, they will have been appointed, if you approve the recommendations, to some of the new posts. We then go on to go through the process of competitive recruitment for the remaining posts. I think it's really important we do competitive recruitment as opposed to keeping things internal. No harm at all in a few people coming in from outside, bringing new ideas and new skills with them, but also giving the opportunity for internal staff. You have some really good staff here in Thanet. I've been really impressed since I've been here at the commitment and energy and positive nature. Given what the council's been going through the last year or two, it's really good to see. And there are some people at reasonably junior levels who should have a chance of being promoted into the more senior posts. Otherwise, we might lose them. But they should do that against competition. If they get the position, then they've got a mandate, having been selected against the outside world, which I think would be the good thing to do. And I've been very clear about that, and staff do accept that. So there's a process for implementation, the slotting and the ring fencing process. Again, if you'd like me to, I'm happy to go through that. And then finally, there's a structure chart. And once we've formally agreed the structure, I'll confirm that chart with names against the posts that people are appointed to. And if it's not too confusing, I'll list the functions underneath all of the posts. A fairly consistent message I've had from councillors is you don't know who does what. So the sooner we can actually get a structure together where you do know who does what, the better it will be. And that shouldn't take too long. And that's it. Leader, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Members, questions? Councillor Everett.
Yeah, thanks for the report, Colin. I think it's excellent, and I don't have any problem with any of the principles in it. And you did share some of the outlines of where you were going with it while you were putting it together, which I appreciated. And obviously, we all as councillors have to work with it. It's just not for the current administration, so that's all good. And I think it's good that we can have some consensus around it. I think that the issue of councillors appointing the director level, I absolutely agree with you. I think it's slightly confused by the fact that council appoints the 151 officer and the monitoring officer. And since those post holders have tended to be at director level, it almost wasn't an issue really in terms of those two posts. Now obviously you're proposing something slightly different here, which is fine, is understood. But I think that does go back here a long while. I don't think it was a recent development or something that was inserted in the system in the last few years. I think this was the case going back to the 2011-15 council, as far as I know. One of the things I wondered about is, we have, and hopefully we're not going to be in the position in the future of having lots of temporary appointments, but to what extent would the temporary appointments be discussed with members and through this structure? And the other thing really is about, it's great that you put these recommendations in front of us, but clearly GP doesn't have the authority to change the scheme of delegation. So what you're saying is you'll go by what GP says today, which is fine. Are these changes in terms of how appointments are made going to be incorporated into the Constitution, and are they going to go through a proper constitutional process in order for that to happen? Because I think part of the IMO recommendations was a review of the Constitution. So I don't know where we are with that and how that's all going to flow through. And just finally a comment, I think, about the appointment panel. It's a great idea having a politically balanced appointment panel, but it can get quite clunky even so if you've got 4 parties and you've got one party which is significantly larger than the others. You're already down the road probably of having 5 or 6 people. And obviously political proportionality isn't always going to mean that every party gets representation, and we don't know what the situation is going to be after the election. Nonetheless, there can be challenges in that, is all I'd say. Thanks.
Yeah. On the last point, when I was appointed in Canterbury, the appointment committee was 7 councillors, which was pretty terrifying. 2 Labour, 2 Conservative, 3 Liberal Democrats, and the vote was 4-3, interestingly, but spread around, so I was quite happy with that. But no, I mean, I agree it's clunky, but to be honest, candidates at this kind of level need to expect this, and most candidates would expect councillors to be on the panel. It is usual, and I don't think they'd be put off, and to be honest, anybody who is put off by facing a councillor panel of 6, let's say, shouldn't really be appointed to the job, being a bit simplistic about it, but I don't think they should. The 151 and monitoring officer, yeah, the 151 in the recommendations is attached to one of the director posts, and so there wouldn't be a problem with that. You're right, council has to appoint the monitoring officer, so it's perfectly possible, thinking about it, that the correct thing to do, we need to have a conversation with SMERA, because of course SMERA is interim, and once the structure's completed, we'll then need to take a view about what we do about the post that SMERA is covering. But I think the formal position is that council has to formally approve the allocation of the role of monitoring officer. So, I mean, either we can make it simple and say that the councillor panel appoints the post of head of service and democracy and monitoring officer, or the chief executive appoints to that post, and then council formally approves the monitoring officer being applied to that post, if you see what I mean. Just need to think about it. Personally, I'm very happy with it being extended to councillors. You know, why not? And why make it overly complicated thinking about it? In terms of the change to the Constitution, Samira, did you, because you're managing that?
Yeah, thank you. Basically, to update members, following the appointment of engaged with an external company to look at the constitutional review. We've just started the process literally just before Christmas, so it's work in progress. They will be coming with a report in terms of the format, the timescales, and exactly what we need to change in light of the recommendation. And I'm intending to bring that to the CWP committee towards the end of February, I believe. We haven't got a date yet, but it will be a report going to that, and then obviously it'll go to council thereafter. So it's in progress. It will take a little while because it's not just one recommendation. There's quite a few of them. There's scheme of delegation, there's officer member protocol, and there's other tiddly little things that needs to be amended in there. So we are working towards it quite actively. So I have engaged an external company to look at that.
Thank you. And just more broadly, of course, that falls within the Section 24 and the IMO recommendations, and discussing with the leader very recently the benefit of reporting to council properly through cabinet about how much, hopefully all, of the recommendations have been completed before the local election. So I think this council's gone through the hoops in terms of those reports. You should see what's been done about them. I'm hoping we're fairly close now to the end of the review of Birth 4.5, which was one of the recommendations that was being made, so we should be able to report on that too, so we're close to that. You mentioned members being involved in temporary appointments. I didn't quite understand that. Which temporary appointments did you mean?
No, I was just saying that, well, we've got a temporary head of legal, really.
Oh, I see.
So,
yeah.
So what I'm saying is if temporary appointments were made to the director posts,
yeah.
and obviously there'll be need to be, although I think they fall outside the scope of what you've suggested, temporary head of service posts from time to time. But I mean, if you had to make if there was a need for a temporary appointment to a director post, is that something that you would envisage being discussed by members, or
Yeah,
Because-
I would, yes. Whether it's temporary or permanent, I think if members have the the duty is the right word, to appoint the post of director, that should apply whether it's temporary or permanent. I think whether you'd want a full appointment subcommittee meeting to interview candidates depends on how rapidly you need somebody. You could do it by consultation, by email or something of this. But I think having it endorsed, even if it's a temporary position, would be the right thing to do.
Thank you. I think I can understand where Councillor Everett's coming from, because I think there were quite a few appointments to this council of interim senior officers, statutory officers, that actually weren't processed through any type of member involvement. So I think that's probably where you're coming from, Rick, and absolutely agree. I mean, I could never understand, although it might be an interim statutory officer, they are still a statutory officer and if they end up staying for a long period of time, then members should certainly have involvement with the selection of that. So, and I think that's a bit of a gap in the system that we need to close. So that's refreshing to hear that. Next to speak, Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Colin, for this. I think it's excellent, and I'm really pleased to see various ways in which it brings us more in line with the way that the majority of councils do things, names and everything, and member involvement. I think it's particularly important, having had a reputation as being an officer-led council in the past, and we've addressed many of those issues, that going into the local elections we can say to voters, here is a proposal that will involve members in appointing the senior officers, because it makes no more sense to say, as I've heard people say, we have no jurisdiction over that, or that's not our remit with regard to senior officers, than it is to say, why have we got no remit in sorting out cleansing services because Mark Greening is a professional and he can do it better than we can. It seems to me that there's a misunderstanding there about roles and delegation, and it's really important, particularly at the moment coming up to elections, that we make it really clear that we are the council, we are in charge, and whoever our successors are will be in charge. I've just got a couple of questions. The first one was about what you envisage the timescales might be. And the second one has gone totally out of my head. So if you would answer the first one, I might remember the second. Thank you.
Happens to me all the time. Yeah, the timescale, I mean, as soon as possible, I would say, although... So the choices are effectively the 1st of March, but that feels a wee bit quick. But actually, if the slotting and ring fencing appointments are made next week, which I'm hoping to be able to do, then actually the 1st of March isn't too far away. The 1st of April, however, would help in terms of accounts, but that might leave people hanging on for some time. So it's I'm tempted by the 1st of March, I have to say, just to get it done. I would still need people to continue with some of the acting arrangements, because there will be a number of posts that are vacant, which will need to be covered. So, for example, nobody is either in a position to be slotted or ring-fenced into the head of operations, which I'm now calling the head of cleansing. And Matt is covering that, and I would want Matt to continue to cover it until it was filled through some sort of competitive recruitment. So we'll still need to do some of the acting pending appointments being made. I mean, I'd quite like, again, subject to agreeing this, having done the slotting and ring-fencing appointments next week, to advertise the other posts in February, and then to be recruiting to them probably in March, and just getting it done as quickly as possible. So, the 1st of March makes some sense. That's probably what I would go for. Finance colleagues would rather it was April, so I'm in a bit of a conversation about that.
I did remember what the other thing was, if I may, and that was just you and I have had a little conversation, I think, on email about involvement of the broader generality of members, and you mentioned the possibility of maybe doing something at a members' briefing about your thinking around this, so that it could be shared more widely with councillors. Have you got any further with that thinking?
Yeah, happy to do that. Obviously, once it's all done, we've got people appointed. And I forgot to answer an earlier question, which I think was to do with reporting some of this to council. And yes, the changes to terms of reference of this committee, the creation of the appointment subcommittee, will need to be formally approved by council because those are changes to the constitution. To be fair to Samira, I bounced Samira because it was a very confidential process, if you like. Poor Samira got about 2 hours to look at the legality of some of these issues, and we had a debate about what was to be reported to council and what wasn't. We don't think the structure needs to be formally approved by council, but the creation of an appointment subcommittee does, and the changes to the terms of reference. I'm not here on the 9th of February, as I was told the leader I was away in February. But I will be back on the 23rd evening, so it would be helpful from my point of view to have all this reported to the 23rd of February council, and then we could get it all formally changed.
Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I can't remember how long ago it was now, but we used to have a system here where, for appointing a chief executive, there was a panel that actually brought a shortlist, usually of 3 people, and then those 3 actually presented to council, and council made the choice. Now, it seems to me that you raised your eyebrows, but well, but I mean, I believe that it gave a lot more buy-in to the appointment with it being done that way. And I can certainly remember being a member of a group for all that time, that our leader would have been on the sort of shortlisting and would then come back and done their very best to convince us without seeing anybody which one we should pick. But we didn't have to pick that one. But I mean, it does seem to me that the full council for that appointment involved in some way would make some kind of sense. And the other thing is an incredibly nitpicky thing, but it does prove I've read the report. Under head of coastal and public realm, you've got open spaces, and under head of cleansing services, you've got street cleaning. But my understanding is that we're now recruiting operatives who are flexible to work across both disciplines. So it seems a bit strange that they're in under different service heads.
Okay. On your first point, I've heard the City of London does that. And I've also spoken to a candidate who had to go through it once, and the person was a gibbering wreck by the end of it. I mean, you can do it. You can do it. There are some councils that require council to endorse the recommendation of the appointment subcommittee, or whatever they're called, before the person is appointed. That's quite common, actually. And you can either, as council, delegate everything, including the choice, to the appointment subcommittee, or council can reserve the appointment of the chief executive in particular to themselves, but they'd have to do that on the back of a recommendation from the appointment sub. It just feels to me like managing an interview process from 56 councillors might be a slightly tricky thing to do, but in the end, just thinking it through, in the end this is a politically taken appointment, and you might well be right that there's more buy-in. Very happy to have a conversation about that as an alternative. My instinct was to delegate it to an appointment subcommittee, which is a bit, cosier and easier for people to deal with, but you can do it the other way.
Yeah, I mean, but the small point that does seem to me that there is this potential, I think as Councillor Everett raised, that you could get a certain balance of members here that meant if you politically balance that committee, you would lose representation from some sections of the membership completely. Yeah. And some involvement of full council would at least enable that to happen. And, I don't know if it's possible, but it seems to me you could almost get a situation where the controlling group actually held sway on that appointments committee, even though they might not have been the majority in council. I think.
They wouldn't, would they, though, if it was politically balanced?
Well, it depends on how many small parties you've got, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it does.
Because if you have
Yeah.
stretch where there are a lot of smaller parties that might not get a representation on the panel.
It might.
if there are a lot of smaller parties that might not get a representation on that selection panel, then you could land up with the controlling group having a disproportionate say, even though they weren't the majority.
Yeah.
I think.
You
I
could.
don't know, maybe not. I mean, maybe I haven't thought that through properly.
Very happy to
maybe I'm just
have to think
wedded
about
to
it.
seeing potential chief executives sweat a bit.
No harm in that. On the open spaces issue, yeah, I mean, where to put open spaces was actually one of the hot topics in the second round of consultation. And I'd say about half of the officers who replied thought that what you suggested was the right thing to do, which effectively would have put open spaces into cleansing. And the basis for that, again, was exactly what you were saying, which was everybody that works in these areas are effectively blue-collar workers, and you can switch people from open spaces to street cleaning and vice versa if you've got shortages. And I mean, I can see the advantage of that. In the end, I kind of got to the view, and a number of other people took this view, that open spaces, you should go by functions and whether they connect to other functions rather than work on the basis of the kind of worker that operates in particular areas. So, you know, open spaces being connected to the kind of work we do on beaches and the coastal areas made some sense. I would confess, though, I was, you know, it was a very close run thing, this one, and you could have gone the other way. So.
Councillor Everett.
Yeah, I was under the impression that the statutory officers had to be appointed by full council, certainly the monitoring officer and the 151 officer, so presumably the head of paid service does as well. In my experience on school governing bodies, where we've had interview panels and we've interviewed for the head teacher, and I don't know whether it's the law or it was just the way we were set up to act, but certainly we would interview and choose a candidate, and then we would take the recommendation to the full governing body. Yes. Admittedly, the full governing body didn't have 56 members, but we would take it, and then the full governing body would agree it. So I'm not sure what we're discussing. I mean, I appreciate chief executive and the head of paid service aren't absolutely necessarily the same person, but they're very likely to be the same person here. So wouldn't we be taking it to full council anyway?
Yeah, you would. Although I think Councillor Bayford was talking about interviewing by full council, which I'm not entirely sure is good. But full council formally appointing, no, were you not? I'm sorry.
Well, not in the true sense of the word. I mean, they'd already would have been interviewed by some kind of committee. I can't remember what committee it was or how they arrived at it, but they would do that, and they would bring you a shortlist. And you know, there was the opportunity for a very limited number of questions. That's all. But primarily, it was presentation by that, and as I say, sort of information given, because each group had, in those days, had a representative on this selection committee, so that that person could report back on what they thought and what we should be looking for and so on. But I just felt it gave a better buy-in, that's all.
Well, maybe we could combine the 2 points, and you're quite right, Councillor Everett. I think the head of paid service clearly does have to be appointed by council. I think council had to agree that I would be head of the paid service before I started, I think, but council did. That's simply, however, saying the council agrees that a named individual should hold that statutory role. But if you combined it with the possibility of some form of panel, politically balanced panel, getting the numbers down to 2 or 3 people and offering those choices to council, there might be another way of doing it. I mean, my suggestion would be, if you're comfortable with this, that you agree what's in here, and that we have the conversation with the next council as soon as possible, as soon as it's elected, about which way they would prefer to go. Very happy to make a change then and act accordingly.
Members, I intend to just, for the point of correctness, just run through the 9 recommendations, but I also, having gone through it closely myself, I would like to move an amendment to item 7 which following that conversation, I've actually amended it slightly from my original proposal amendment. So I think, Charles, I would move the amendment now and get that through, and then go through and then read the amended through on the last one. Right, okay. So, members... All right, so item 7 of the recommendations. So it's for this exercise only to delegate to the Chief Executive the responsibility of recommending appointments to vacant posts of Director at the competitive recruitment stage to this committee for formal approval. I would like to propose that we amend that to move that the appointments of Directors and Chief Executive made by the newly formed appointment subcommittee, which would then go on to be formally agreed by full council. So, if members have any thoughts on that? Councillor Bayford.
Well, only thinking that if after today, effectively, you need people at director level, it may be the chief executive appointing those interims. You need that in here, don't you?
So what I was suggesting in the recommendations, but you know, there are lots of different ways of skinning this particular cat, so I'm not worried about changing it, is really to get the appointment process into the new structure carried out as quickly as possible. I was suggesting that I do all the appointments, but ask this committee to meet and formally endorse the recommendation. I think what the leader's proposing is that the appointment subcommittee would be created as soon as possible. Is that correct? And that the director appointments, which would be effectively the Director of Place and the Director of Environment, would be appointed by that subcommittee and then reported to council, are you saying?
Yeah.
Right. The Director of Corporate Services is going to be ring-fenced to Chris Blundell, so that would probably, subject to the interview, be filled as part of next week's processes. But the other two directors would be vacant.
But, I mean, would you not need some of your newly appointed heads of service, one or two of those need to step up to fill those director roles in the very short term? And if that's the case, wouldn't it be easier that you do that? Because you're only do it from the people that you've got there already, and that the appointment of the directors, when it actually comes to it, then this committee gets involved, or that appointments committee gets involved.
I was trying to avoid it being too complicated, and really I was thinking I would just keep the current temporary arrangements in place. So, for example, at the moment, Bob Porter is temporarily covering Director of Place. Just leave that be until the post is filled by the method the leader's talking about.
Councillor Everett.
Yeah, and I think to constitute the appointment subcommittee, you've got to go through the constitutional process and bring that to council to be agreed, because otherwise the committee doesn't exist. So I think we're then pushing down to the end of February before you can appoint the subcommittee. So I don't think this is a sensible way forward, if I'm honest. Not for any other reason. I just think we need to get on with things. I don't see a way around that if you're going to go through a proper constitutional process.
I think maybe, right, okay, the bit I might have caused a confusion with is that I'm concerned at the three director levels. Obviously, I would like the subcommittee or even the GPC to have some sort of oversight on that, because these are Director of Corporate Service, which is obviously a ring-fenced position, but Director of Environment and Director of Place technically are new positions, so it'll either be existing officers that apply for it or external. So my thoughts are that those positions won't be advertised until probably March.
We could do it in February.
We could do it in February, but the applicants would come in by March, by which time we could have formed the recruitment process. It's just that I wanted members to be involved because they are two really high-level positions within the council. I just wanted us to be involved at that stage. I mean, I'm quite happy to actually for the chief executive to do it, and that's originally where our thoughts were coming from. But at some point, it needs to come through either GPC and then move on to council, as we're saying, for these positions. I mean, I'm easy either way. It's just that I felt that that this would then bring more members into the process at an earlier stage. But I'm obviously up for debate on this. I mean, I can see what you're saying as well, but I think the timing would fit into it. I'm not sure whether we can get. I assume we could get it into the council meeting at the end of February for the formation of the recruitment committee.
You've got council on the 9th of February. I know Colin's not around then, but there's nothing to stop the subcommittee being. Yeah, it's budget, yeah.
So do it on the 23rd.
23rd.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that budget on the night, whether the full council, does it have to be exclusively council? But certainly we could bring it to the 23rd. So I think that will be plenty of time to form it. And it's really just to put it through an extra process, and it's only for the director level, of which there will only be 2 positions, plus the future for the. I mean, we've got to bring it in anyway because it has to be in there for obviously the recruitment of the chief executive going forward. So I thought if we bring it in sooner rather than later, then technically what are new positions in the new structure, then if it could be up and running, then it would only click into the process. Councillor Austin.
As I said before, I'm all for more member involvement, as much member involvement as we practically can, although I'm a little scared by Councillor Bayford's suggestion. But yes, I'm with that, as long as it can be managed practically in the timescale that we're talking about, because we don't want to be hanging about, and it's not fair to staff to keep them hanging around.
Councillor Bayford.
At the risk of doing this to death, Chairman, I still think there's an issue that if Chief Executive is going to put these people into their slotted positions in the next couple of weeks, that at the same time, really, as he's mentioned him, we could say if he still wanted Bob Porter as the temporary director of place, for that to happen, Chief needs to have the authority to do that without this committee getting involved. So it's a sort of 2-stage thing. I'm just thinking that, if the place is going to run smoothly, then Chief needs to be able to put his temporary, and he might want to appoint a temporary director of environment, for instance, out of one of those people. And I just think that needs to be done without member involvement, as long as member involvement is there for the permanent positions.
That is my proposal, really. It's not for the interim process. It is for when we go live with the new structure. So does that sum it up? I think maybe I've caused a bit of confusion here, but I mean, there has to be a point at which time this appointment committee is formed and when it becomes live. So it's whether or not it becomes live after the chief has done all that he needs to do, or whether we do it at a stage where the chief has done everything that he needs to do, and then we cut in the appointments committee. I think my intention is to cut in the appointments committee is for when we actually start the recruitment process for the director level. But I mean, how we word that's what I'm trying to do, as opposed to everything being done and then we say, right, okay, we've done everything we need to do with the new structure, now the appointments committee come in, but everyone's already in place. So, it's where it lies with that. But I mean, if someone wants to amend the amendment, then that's fine. But Chief Exec, maybe, are we on the same page here, or have I actually confused the whole
So
issue?
I think, tell me if I'm wrong, I think what you're suggesting is that councillors through this appointment subcommittee should be involved in appointing to the Director of Environment and Director of Place,
Yes.
which otherwise, in the recommendation I've set out here, I would do.
Yeah.
I don't think it holds it up if you wanted to do that, because all we need to do is to get the subcommittee in place. If you're comfortable as a subcommittee, for example, with me doing some shortlisting and presenting you with 3 or 4 or 5, whatever candidates for you to interview, I don't think it holds it up particularly. All we need to do is get it in place by the time Council meets on the 23rd of February, so that you can formally set a subcommittee up and have it in place. Picking up your point, Councillor Bayford, it'd be useful to explicitly exclude the temporary acting arrangements, because otherwise we will get trapped into all sorts of process. But if we would say something along the lines, Charles, about delegating to me under 7 the responsibility of taking decisions about temporary cover arrangements pending the new structure being put into place, and to picking up in 8, recommending to Council the creation of politically balanced appointment subcommittee, take out the words municipal year and say as soon as possible, with terms of reference to oversee the process of appointment, then that would include the new directors coming along. So we just take out the words the municipal year. If you're comfortable, I could have a word with Charles and Samira and just get the wording right. I think we know what you're trying to achieve, though, which is that councillors are given the role of appointing to the directors of place and environment, which I think picks up your point, Councillor Austin. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that.
Councillor Everett.
So just on a question of timing, then we're gonna need to have a Constitution Review Working Party meeting and a standards meeting before the papers are required for the 23rd of February in order to propose the constitutional changes, aren't we? Because that's the way they have to be done. Neither of which are in the diary at the moment.
Has to go through standards, does it? Right.
Yeah.
All right. We'll have a chat. Do we think that's possible? Because if it's not, we need to say so now. Should be all right, shouldn't it?
Should be okay.
Yeah.
Before the end of February.
Before the 23rd, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Bayford.
I was just questioning why it has to go through standards. I mean, Constitutional Working Party I can understand, but I don't understand what has to go through standards.
I think that's what's in the Constitution.
Well, yeah, I know,
Could be wrong.
but I don't see why it does.
Be good if it didn't.
Samira, can you note that we want to amend the Constitution?
I need to check whether it's I think you're right. I need to double check whether it's the CWP or whether it's the Standards Committee. But can I come back and confirm that? I'm pretty sure it's standard, but let me just double check the Constitution before we. Yeah. But we haven't got any dates. We've got dates for standard, haven't we?
Well, I know in the previous constitutional review, we had, I mean, that was called quite late doors, so, I mean, we are quite used to working party, quite used to being called in quite quickly, so, and the standards followed our last one quite quickly afterwards. I think it was about members' allowances or something like that, I can't remember now, but I think it can be called within a couple of weeks, and then the standards can follow straight after. So I think we should better fit it in between now. We've got 23rd. We've got 4 weeks, haven't we? So we should be able to do it. Well, I'm not moaning, but I sit on the CWP, so it's WP. So that's another meeting I've got to go to. So yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem, and I think that. If that's the Constitution, that's what we've got to do. But so to be clear on my amendment, we are saying the wording on item 7 is amended to the appointment of directors and chief executive be made by the newly formed appointment subcommittee, and in this instance referring specifically to the 2 outstanding director roles, and that will then formally be agreed by council.
You want them approved by council, director posts?
Well, because it includes the chief executive appointment, then it has to go to council as well, so full council. So can we, the director roles going forward, do we want to see the director roles, bearing in mind that that usually includes a statutory officer, to go be approved by full council? So in order to save any confusion, it might be at that level, which is the director level, that and above, which is the chief exec, go to full council just for final approval, following the recommendations of the appointments committee. Rick, sorry, Councillor Everett.
I just feel we're sort of trying to do the work of the Constitution Review Working Party now, and I think that, you know, we're only making we're only having a discussion because we're not making any decisions here anyway. So perhaps what that needs is further consideration by CRWP, or refer it for further consideration, and then you can put your proposal there. Because otherwise we're trying to resolve an issue that we're not in a position to resolve.
Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and as far as today is concerned, I mean, I thought the proposal was that we'd effectively delegate the chief exec to work with Charles to work on wording for 7 and 8, given that he understands what it is we're trying to do.
Which I think is to allow councillors to appoint to the post of Director of Environment. I think we can tweak the wording to make that happen. No problem. I think the problem, sorry Lou, in terms of having directors confirmed by council is the amount of time that might take. You might just fall with an interview date a week or so after council, and then everybody's got to wait 3 or 4 weeks until the next meeting of council to get their appointment confirmed. It's not great, really. I mean, personally, I would have thought an appointment subcommittee appointing directors and having the power to do that would be fine. I absolutely take the point about the chief executive post being confirmed by council. That seems sensible. But many people would be used to that and probably expect it. So I think holding directors up for a month or so may not be a good thing to do.
Okay. So I will withdraw that proposal and replace it with that item 7 will stay as is, but I propose that that particular part of the process is referred, for future process, is referred to the Constitutional Review Working Party to decide its exact wording and process. So for this particular exercise, item 7 will stand.
I thought we were delegating the work with Charles.
So would you like to make a counter proposal then, and then I can...
Well, I'd like to propose that we adopt whatever it is, item, the recommendations 1 to 9, with the proviso that items 7 and 8 may be reworded by the chief executive.
Consultation review.
Okay, so have you got that... Right, so I have a proposer to amend 7 and 8. See how nicely I've manipulated it into your proposal. Councillor Everett is second. So that is 7 and 8. I think we need to go, just for the sake of clarity, refer back to what members are being asked to. So we've agreed that. So we need to also agree the items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 9. What, 1 to 9? Okay. And it's been seconded by Councillor Everett. So I think members like to, it's been proposed and seconded. I'd like to see a show of hands for this particular item if we are in agreement with that. That is unanimous, Charles. Thank you, members. It's been an interesting meeting, and that concludes the business for today. Thank you. I declare the meeting closed at 4:28.